The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, if it is the case for you. Welcome back to STAR Center Talks Compensation Planning. This is the fourth in the six-part series, and we are glad that you are here joining us today. So this is a webinar that is put on by ACU, and I'm not sure that I'm not sure if you've joined us for these webinars or familiar with the work that we do and here at ACU, but we're really focused on two goals in the workforce space. And the recruitment and retention of a transdisciplinary team is how we get there. So we do a lot of things, and you can visit our website at clinicians.org to find out all the awesome things that we do at ACU. But I'm really here to talk to you about a specific project. And the reason why I'm here is because of the STAR Center. And the STAR Center is a project of ACU, and it is a project that is funded by HRSA's Bureau of Primary Health Care. Now, the STAR Center is funded by the Bureau as a National Cooperative Agreement, or NCA, and we are funded to bring you a bunch of free, yes, I said free, tools and resources on clinician recruitment and retention. So you can go to our website at chcworkforce.org. Yes, that is a different website than ACU's website, and that's on purpose because all of the tools and resources that we have at chcworkforce.org are free. So if you haven't been there, or if it's been a while since you've been there, we would encourage you to go there very soon after this webinar and check it out and look at all the great things that we have developed recently. So I'm Suzanne Spear. I'm the Director of Workforce Development here at ACU, and I am joined by an all-star team that rounds out our STAR Center staff. So we have Mariah Blake on the line today. She is our program manager. She is the one who keeps us all running and keeps these webinars up and going. So if you have any technical issues today, feel free to email her at mblake@clinicians.org, and she'll get you pointed in the right direction. Allison Abesekra is also on the STAR Center team. She is our VP of Training and Programs. She's not on this call today, but she is an integral part of our STAR Center team, and so we always like to mention all three of the staff that makes up our core STAR Center team. So you can feel free to reach out to us at any time if you have things that you have questions on or any of the resources on our website. Just a couple things before we get started today on the content. We are recording this webinar, so we will make it available afterwards, and you can feel free to download it and listen to it again at your leisure, or if you missed a part of it, or if you missed some of the previous episodes, then feel free to go back and download and listen to those again. Ask questions. We encourage questions. Questions are fantastic and great. So as we go along today, please put your questions when you think about them. Put the questions, go ahead, in the questions box, and we'll monitor those as we go along, and then we'll answer them all at the end, but feel free to ask them as we go along as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Curt Degenfelder. He is back with us again this week for the third and final installment of his part of this series, and he is going to be talking about provider compensation, incentive compensation, and retention. These are some really hot topics, and I know a lot of you are tuned in and are excited to hear what he has to say. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Curt. So Curt, take it away.
Okay, thank you, and good morning, everyone. This is the third webinar that I have done in this series, and the last one. For those of you who have been at the previous ones, what I would suggest is one small change. If you have questions, if you could type them in the question box as we go. What's happened on some of the previous ones is kind of we've ended near the end, and then people have been kind of under the gun to put the questions in. So I think it might be a little bit easier for everyone if you kind of put them in as we go along, because we do have a lot of slides, some of which I'm going to go through very quickly, but I do want to have time to get to your questions and, of course, to be able to answer them.
You should have mouse control now, Curt.
Mouse control now, okay.
Yes.
Okay. Got it. So, first I just wanted to put a basic, understanding of why we talk about provider productivity, right? So we've often taken a little of this from the financial perspective. What would we get if our providers did 100 more visits a year? Let's say our average net revenue per visit is $120 at this community health center. So 100 more visits from that provider would generate 120 times 100 or $12,000 more revenue. We're not paying our staff anymore. We have money to pay incentive compensation, in this case, $4,000, and we'll get into that. We might have some variable expenses like medical supplies for those 100 new visits, office supplies. Perhaps we, are also paying for outside contracted lab for the self-pay. But if you look in this case, the marginal expenses are $4,900. The marginal revenue is $12,000. So this makes sense financially for us. So if we can increase productivity, we as a health center, are willing to and can afford to pay for it. So a couple thoughts before we get into this. So I'm out in LA, and so I get to talk to a lot of people in what we call out here the industry or Hollywood. They always tell me, an important thing in doing a pitch is never bury the lead. So the lead here is, while I've shown an increase in productivity, we're talking about retention here. So while we think about this as an incentive to change behavior, I want you to also think about it as a retention system. Is this something we need just to keep providers, especially our high-performing providers? So with that, a few notes on incentive compensation. First, we have to have a system that we can afford. The health center needs to get paid first. And we're going to look at some models where it comes from profit sharing, some other models where we talk about developing the pool. Secondly, a lot of this is kind of annually based. So while you might earn incentive compensation every day, I want you to think, as we go in the model, just keep in the back of your mind, maybe we need a withhold that says, if we meet our goals, we'll pay out all the incentive compensation. If we fall short of our goals, but maybe above break even, we pay out some of the incentive compensation. And then if we don't meet our goals or we have a loss, maybe there's a guaranteed piece and then a piece that they don't, that the providers, and we're going to talk a little bit about staff, don't earn. But I've seen in a number of health center situations, while I said retention is important, the health center is losing money and still paying out substantial incentive compensation, and that is problematic, obviously. It makes a bad bottom line even worse. Okay, so here's an example of a profit-based incentive comp. So this is a client of mine, obviously a large client, and what they said is, our goal is a 3% profit margin. And obviously results are going to be varied by their health center, by health center, but what they say is, we give out anything over a 3% profit margin, we're going to pay out kind of in our incentive compensation system, we're going to pay 40% of that to the employees. Now this system, I just wanted to note, first of all, this is a somewhat large health center. You can see about $33 million of annual revenue, but this is also a system for both provider as well as administrative. So this is kind of everyone in the health center is sharing those dollars. Okay, so a few other things, and again, a lot of these are cautionary tales. I've seen monthly incentive compensation where it's paid out monthly. I would recommend that you pay not more than quarterly for a few reasons listed on the slide. One is providers then tend to see it as part of their normal compensation. Maybe it even flows through the regular payroll system, and so they don't see, the goals. They don't see what they're earning. They don't understand the portion of it. They don't understand how their salary relates to incentive compensation. So it's a system that doesn't work well for that reason. The second is, our even high-performing health centers might have variations in their performance from month to month. And so what we never want to do is be in a situation where we're asking for money back from our providers. So if you have a bad month followed by a good month, right, you're not going to make up for, once you've paid the money out, you're not going to make up for those dollars. And then lastly, we make a lot of adjustments, and I don't want to get into details of this, but sometimes we make rather large adjustments to our financial statements. And so I don't want you to ever be in a situation where, again, you've paid out money and then you realize what you thought was a profit is a loss. So sometimes after the books are closed at the end of the year, either after the finance staff has made their final adjustments or after your external auditor has completed your audit, that's the time after that to pay out the full incentive compensation. Hold some back. I know that getting cash and cash flow, while it's important to the health center, it's also important to the providers. But again, this is our protection, and I'm starting out with kind of protection and things to think about. Okay, we're going to talk, so this is about providers. This is in the context, though, of potentially having a three-tiered program, which is not unusual. So I want to bring that out. Management team, providers, and staff. And I talked about some of the measurement criteria. I'm going to show some of these with more simple criteria, and a lot of this is just mix and match. I wanted to put a lot of examples in here so that you could decide what's the best for you. Okay, so what makes an incentive system work? One is transparency. How does the system work and how do we get paid? Again, more cautionary tales. I have seen some very complicated systems that no one really knows how they work. And so the payment, you don't want to end up in a situation where you're giving extra money to your providers and they're unhappy about it, right? So making it too complicated, making it unclear how they earn the money, not relating it to an individual's performance, especially on a provider basis. It's harder to do on a staff or management basis, but especially on a provider basis, really can lead to bad ends. So thinking about how do we make it transparent, and then saying how much can you earn? What is the max, or what is the typical amount to give them some idea of ahead of time. When it comes to compensation, in my experience, people don't like surprises. Customization, the reason I'm showing you lots of examples is you might pick which one works right for you. And a very simple model on a later slide of a health center with actually fairly low productivity, but they put in an incentive compensation to say, we want to go from, kind of terrible productivity to, bad productivity, I guess, which is, which can be incentivized and which did have a positive impact on the bottom line. Obviously, you want to pay more, but some of the examples I gave are from large health centers, so you got to say, what can I afford to do? I think it needs to be large enough to be meaningful. And I'm not sure, I know we have a number of HR people, I'm not sure what that means exactly. You know, it is not, it's got to be, especially for providers. Providers are not as swayed by, you know, having a holiday party instead of not having one, or the Starbucks gift card. It means dollars, right, for them. And that may mean limiting participants. And I'm going to talk about what participants might be limited, especially on the provider side. And then it needs to be linked directly from performance. We talked about it in the prior webinars, that sometimes providers don't understand the relationship between their performance and their compensation. And then they also don't understand where the health center gets its money from, you know, this idea of, well, it's paid for, you know, by the grant or other things. So we need to be considerate of that. I just want to add one other thing that popped into my head when I talked about waiting till the end of the year. If you are in a position where you are receiving, the health center, are receiving incentive compensation dollars from a payer, really the later in the year you pay it until you know that amount, either until you've received that cash or until you've gotten the report from the payer. I think it's great if you can wait until that, because those figures tend to fluctuate widely from year to year. So I wouldn't want you to kind of pay out an incentive compensation based on a $2 million profit, a $2 million incentive compensation that you got last year that might not recur this year. Need to have distinct criteria for both participating as well as for earning the incentive compensation, and we're going to look at those. Who participates? Now here again, I would separate provider incentive compensation from other employees. Provider, you'll see when we get into the setup of the system, provider performance is very measurable. You know, sometimes in the systems we check, we're going to have to do a little extra data collection, but I feel that's very measurable. Front desk staff, billers, QA coordinators, a little bit harder to measure. And so, you know, if everyone gets it on the provider level, I'm not sure it's truly an incentive. That may be less true for the staff level. And then this question, what is the minimum percentage of providers who should earn incentive compensation for the program to be successful? I would flip it the other way and say, I'm okay if not everyone earns it. I'm okay if less than half earn it. You know, just my experience in working with health centers is you get a huge range of provider performance. You get those high performers who both can be incentivized as well as who are doing well anyway, and for whom the incentive compensation is a reward program. I got no problem with that. Then you kind of have the middle group that might earn it sometimes, but not all the time. And then you kind of have a lower group, which again, just isn't earning it, maybe isn't meeting their targets. Obviously, we have trouble recruiting providers. You know, they might not be the ideal providers for our health center, but you know, they're seeing patients. They form part of our care delivery team, so it's okay with me if they're not earning incentive compensation. Administration, if it's too complicated, if only one person is in charge of it, and that person is the only one who knows how to figure it out, if that person is doing all the calculations, if there is a ton of variables, it creates opportunity for errors. And again, that's where we take our positive, you know, extra money for our providers and turn it into a negative. Hey, I did well and you paid me the wrong amount. So also, you know, just health center administrative teams don't need more work. So, you know, not making it too complicated, I think, is important. I think we need to think about a minimum. And, we talked, I believe, in the last session about signing bonuses. Perhaps this is not something for new providers, and this is probably something that's going to go along with your provider contract. So maybe you need to be employed for like 6 months, to make sure, I've seen kind of extreme provider turnover, so that might work. And then, I've seen health centers that say if you leave any incentive compensation you've earned, you kind of lose. So if it's paid on a quarterly basis, the quarter you're leaving in, you're not getting that compensation, that incentive compensation for. And certainly it sends a bad message if a provider or any employee is on a performance plan or probation and we're paying them extra money in incentive compensation, right? Those are mixed messages, and we would certainly want to avoid that from an incentive perspective. Okay, so I think we also, when we talk about our providers, there might be a lot of other ways our providers earn dollars. And so I want you to think of this. I have a slide just in a second that I'm going to show you what I mean by this. But are there different ways for providers to earn additional funds, and how does your incentive compensation compare to that? So we've got lots of other, when we think about total compensation, incentive compensation is just one piece. And this slide I really, really, really like. This is from an actual health center. It's a few years old. And so the salaries are lower, so don't say, oh my gosh, these salaries. I also did not show on here, some of these folks are NPs, some of them were there partial years, so don't get too hung up on the numbers themselves. To me, what's really important is the relativity of these. So one thing that's very interesting to me is what we did here is we looked at their base pay, we looked at their salary per visit, their salary, we looked at the number of visits we did, and we compared it per visit. So you see there's a big range. Then in that column, base pay as a percentage of total pay, so total provider pay is the second to last column. So they had float time to kind of move around to different sites. This was a health center that had some urban or rural sites. They paid them for their inpatient time. They had a stipend to work, I think, both on Saturday as well as the low volume site. And then they had their incentive compensation system. So if you look at this health center, their inpatient program was much more incentivizing, as it were, than their incentive comp system, and it took kind of inequities in pay and exacerbated those inequities rather than ameliorating those inequities. So I think what you really want to do is say, well, what else are we paying our providers for? And then two things. Number one, I really like that total pay per visit to say, what are we getting for our money? And then, or, how does their pay relate to the revenue they bring in, and comparing it amongst providers, number one. And then number two, you might even want to calculate incentive pay as a percentage of total compensation. As you can see, it's pretty low. So this was a system that didn't work, and this health center really had to think about how they, distributed the dollars amongst their various programs. Okay, so now we're going to show kind of a provider measurement system. So this system is based on 4 measures: productivity, patient satisfaction, quality, and something I call contribution to the organization. So first of all, I'll be very, very upfront. I believe that every health center provider incentive compensation system that I have ever seen includes productivity. And if you remember on last week's webinar, when we had information about health systems, if I recall correctly, the numbers were something like 75% of health systems have an incentive compensation system based on productivity. Maybe only 35% had something based on quality. We didn't get granular enough to look if they looked at patient satisfaction or contribution to the organization. So, full disclosure, both, so these are things that we'd like our providers to do, but for full disclosure, incentive compensation in both health centers and the marketplace is based primarily on productivity, secondly on quality, and then, today I'm showing a system where we do consider some other factors as well. Okay, productivity again, volume. So here's a thing about productivity. One of the questions on our productivity is, what should we use? So your CFO is incredibly biased to using visits. And the reason your CFO is biased to using visits is that you get paid on a per visit basis. So they want the incentive compensation that results in dollars being paid out to be consistent with the way you earn revenue. And that's understandable. Your providers might be split on that. What your providers might say is, well, so we as health centers always struggle with this concept, do we have sicker patients, right? And if we have sicker patients, what does that mean? So one way to get at that is something called a relative value unit, an RVU. So an RVU looks at three components. So RVUs are something that Medicare certainly uses to make the Part B fee schedule, and lots of other payers use it. It's called RVRVS, or the Resource-Based Relative Value System, and it looks at three components. It looks at physician work, it looks at practice expenses, which in this context they call overhead, and then malpractice. Okay, so I like to use 99213. 99213 is our middle office visit for an established patient. It's very much highly used code in community health centers, so it's a good for demonstration purposes. These are older RVUs, so just to make my model work, I wanted them to tie out. So the work component of a 99213 is 0.97, the overhead is 1.07, the malpractice is 0.07. So I don't want to focus on overhead. I don't want to focus on malpractice because we have FTCA, so I like to use the work component. So you can see here, in this case, provider A did 1,749 work RVU, 99213, so we multiply it times 0.97, which is the RVU for that code. So 0.97 times 1749 is 1696.53. We do that same process for all of the codes. I would say that one ancillary benefit of basing it on RVUs rather than on visits is it improves coding. Okay, our coding is often not great in health centers, And so, you know, if you look, in this case, the 99214 has a much greater work RVU value. And so, you know, that might incentivize our providers to get better. In this case, you look at provider B, does less visits but more RVU, so they're kind of getting credit for that. Might be something for you to think about to say as a way to improve your coding. Okay, so this is kind of complicated, but we are using 4 factors. We need to equalize those 4 factors. So basically, what you need to do here, and I'm not saying you have to use 1100, is make scoring. And this is going to rely on a point scoring system. So, which says that if you did more than 1100 RVUs, you're going to get 3 points. If you were between 1000 and 1100, you're going to get 2 points. If you're between 900 and 1000, you're going to earn 1 point. If you're below 900, you're going to get 0 points. So let's say you had 950 work RVUs, you would get a score of 1. If you use a visit system, you can do something, you know, similar or exactly the same. Set up tiers to earn your points. The second is patient satisfaction, right? That's one of our triple aims. It is something that we want our patients to be satisfied with our providers. The big caveat on patient satisfaction is you have to separate out patient satisfaction with the provider versus patient satisfaction with the rest of the health center, right? You know, I don't want to penalize our providers for issues at the front desk. I don't want to penalize them for, you know, unhelpful MAs. I don't want to, you know, I don't want to penalize them for, you know, they're not happy with having to pay sliding fees. So we need to ask questions about things like medical care. Did the provider communicate? Did they listen and address my concerns? What is their level of people skills? So here are some questions. You don't have to use these questions. These are some questions that I think, though, are representative of a provider. You know, do you feel your provider listened and understood your concerns? How well did your provider meet your primary medical needs? Did they explain your condition? And in this case, this could be part of a larger patient satisfaction survey. So maybe this is 4 out of the 10 questions. We would score that as well. I don't have time to get in all the details. Quality, right? So we're already measuring quality. I'm suggesting some things here. Just on measures, you can decide on what the measures are, but certainly we do a lot of quality measurement, both on the UDS, and some of us use HEDIS. So you could certainly have those measures. One of the things I've seen pushback from your providers, though, to be very upfront on this, is providers have said, you know, I often see patients who aren't my patients, so I'm a little uncomfortable in you using those for quality measures. I would recommend, and this says ICD-9, this needs to be ICD-10. I would recommend that we include some element of closing charts in our incentive compensation system. And the reason I say that is that's a big problem for a lot of health centers. And so I would very, very strongly encourage you to include, closing charts, and there being, you don't get incentive compensation, some disincentive or not rewarding providers who don't close their charts. I might also suggest that quality could potentially be binary. Remember, we had a 1, 2, 3, 4 before. Now this might be 0 or 4. If you don't pass quality, then you get a 0, right? There's no kind of passing quality. Or a different way, I know of health centers that if you don't pass quality, you don't earn incentive compensation. So another way to think about it, as we design our system, the importance of quality, right? And this is something that is a change where it's really been focused historically just on productivity. And then other things. So maybe the CMO is judging them on, are they in committees? Are they in health fairs? Are they doing mentoring? We talked last week about, are they supervising mid-levels? Are they keeping up with their CME? Do they do a lot of other things that we say are important for our providers to do? And are we rewarding that at all? Or is that just something that some providers do well and some don't do well on? So this then is taking our scores and assigning a weight to them. So this health center, and this is this whole thing was based on an actual health center scoring system. They weighted provider productivity at 50%. They rated quality weighted quality at 25%. They weighted patient satisfaction at 15%, and they weighted contribution to the organization at 10%. Obviously, these add up to 100%. So let's say this provider got a 1 on productivity, got a 4 on quality, got a 2 on patient satisfaction, got a 2 on contribution to the organization. And so their overall score is multiplying the score by the weighting. Their overall score is 2.1. Then what we might do, let's say they have 6 providers, we would compare their score on all the scores and say, let's distribute the money based on their percentage of the total points. Okay, so provider A that we're looking at, who got the 2.1, had 2.1 as a percentage of 16.7 is 13%. So if we had a $48,000 incentive compensation pool, they earned 13% of that, or $6,300. Or you might say, if you're getting at least a 1, how many points do they score above the minimum? So in this case, this provider scored 2.1, is only 1.1 above the minimum, or only 10% of the total 10.7. What this does is it kind of rewards the winners more. And so it's a way to kind of make your incentive compensation system more sharply graded. Okay, the second way is a direct pool distribution. Okay, so this one is, we said we have $20,000. We're going to make compensation, we're going to make productivity 50%. So $20,000 times 50% is $10,000. And so here's how we divvy up our $10,000. In this case, we have 3 providers. We look at the work RVUs for each of the providers. Dr. Handler did 2,500 work RVUs. That's 31% of the total. 8,000 RVUs. So we're going to give them 31% of the $10,000 or $3,100. Note that these totals are not totals, right? We're funding the pool first, and then we are coming up with ways of distributing the pool, right? And in this case, we do not require them to pass quality to get this. In this case, we said, well, what is the patient satisfaction score? And yes, they have to pass quality. So in this case, Dr. Jeffries didn't pass quality. We look at the patient satisfaction of the remaining providers, Drs. Handler and Smith. We add 94% and 86% for 180%. Dr. Handler's 94%, it's 52% of the 180%. This pool, since it's 25%, is funded at $5,000. So Dr. Handler is going to get 25% of the 52% of the $5,000 or $2,600. And then when we look at contribution to the organization, again, same thing. This one is dependent on quality. And then if we look at the total, we're adding the total. So instead of giving a quality score, we're making two of the scores dependent upon it. Here's the sample methodology that I talked about. So here's a real simple methodology. So this health center had low productivity. So here they have 3.2 provider FTEs. And you can start earning incentive compensation if you do 850 visits in that period, right? And that's not a ton of visits in a month for 3.2 providers, right? That's about 275 visits per provider, you know, below, let's say, 3,500 visits in annual productivity. So what they said is, Curt, we don't care about national health center averages. We don't care about, you know, what the MGMA says. What we want to do is we are introducing some changes in the schedule. We're introducing some changes in the workflow, and we want to incentivize everybody to do more. So what we're saying is we're going to give of any, so we're just going to base it solely on visits. No quality, no contribution to the organization, no patient satisfaction. And of any dollars earned, we're going to give half to the physicians. We're going to give 20% to the MAs. We're going to give 10% to the front desk. And we're going to give 20% to the other support staff in that clinic. So this health center said if we do more than 850 visits, we're going to give a flat rate of $2,500 for that month. And if we do more than 900 visits, we're going to give a flat rate of $10,000. So in this particular month, they did 10,000 visits. So the providers, they did 935 visits, which earned them the $10,000 because 935 is greater than 900. Again, not great productivity, but an improvement from where they were. And so the physicians would get 50% of that $10,000 or $5,000. The MAs would get 20% of that $10,000 or $2,000. The front desk would get 10% of that $10,000 or $1,000, and the support staff would get 20% of that $10,000 or $2,000, right? So a real simple system. So for those of you looking who don't currently have incentive compensation or who have low productivity, I know I showed an advanced model. I know this doesn't have quality. This is not a bad place to start. This is where I would say most health centers start. So I don't have any problem with a system like this to start out. So this might be incentive compensation system 1.0, maybe incentive compensation system 1.5 might be this very system with higher targets, and then 2.0 might be the more advanced model where I showed quality, where I showed contribution to the organization, and where I showed patient satisfaction. And I apologize for not being able to go in a lot of detail on all of these, but in 1 hour, we're looking at it conceptually. Okay, here is another system that's just based on site profit. So I'm giving you ideas for starting points. This is a health center in Indiana that said, we're going to look at our profit per provider quarterly, and we're going to do a payout. So if our profit is $5,000 per provider, so total site profit divided by the number of provider FTEs, if it's $5,000, each provider is going to get $500. So this is, and if it's $15,000, each provider is going to get $2,000. So this is, again, not based on quality, also not based on differential performance. So there are some health centers that believe, right, especially those that have more team-based care, that believe the team rises or falls, not just your own provider team, but everyone at the site rises and falls together. So this one, you don't see individual scores by provider. This is, we're just paying out, if you're a provider at that site, whether or not your profit was $15,000, right? If your profit was more, your profit was less, you're still going to get $2,000, and the staff at that site are each going to get $500 for the quarter. Okay, so that's very much team-based, and so we can define the team as a provider team, right? So that might be, go along with your PCMH model, where the team is, maybe 2 providers, some MAs, maybe even front desk staff to go along with them. It could be a specialty area like pediatrics or adult medicine. It could be a site like it was defined previously, or it could be the whole health center, that we're all a team and we're funding we're funding incentive compensation for other employees. So here's our example, the example I started with in the beginning of how they broke down those dollars. So here they say the providers can earn up to 45% of the incentive compensation. The non-providers earn 55%. The clerical and non-exempt employees, again, which make up the bulk of your staff. It's not these people are getting more, but here they've broken up by levels, get 45%. The managers, supervisors, and professional staff get 17%. The associate directors and directors get 20%, and the senior management, I know it sounds like get only 18% of that 55%. Keep in mind there's many less people in this group, so they are getting, I said at the beginning, they are getting meaningful dollars. So with that, I am done. I've tried to save some extra time at the end. So I've covered a lot of material in a short time, but I wanted to leave time and more time than we had for questions in the past. So we'll open it for questions. You can type those questions again in that question box.
Okay, it looks like excuse me, I'm so sorry. We don't have any questions yet. So if you thought of a question since Curt went through his fantastic slides, feel free to type that in now. And if there's something that we do have these slides available for download in the handout section of the go-to toolbar on the right side of your screen. So you can download those at any time. They will also be on our website along with the recording. But if you have a question about incentive programs, I know that that's a lot to digest in a relatively short period of time, but Curt is here for the next 8 minutes, and he would be happy to answer any questions that you might have. I know there's got to be a question out there, so somebody just raise their hand. We aren't going to be opening the lines for folks, so if you do have a question, I see a hand raised. Okay, great. We had somebody write in and ask, how do you differentiate payout for support staff like the front office staff who serve multiple providers? That's a great question.
Yeah, okay, so that's the question of how do you define the team, right? So the system I showed in the last was, so one of the choices, so you have kind of 3 choices. One is, once you've decided how much the front desk staff are getting, you can say, we're going to pay out a standard amount per FTE. We're going to say, here's the amount we said we're going to pay for the front desk staff. Here's the number of front desk staff, divide that in, and here's the amount we're paying out per person. The second is, you could say, what is that as a percentage of their salary? Because there are some differentials between front desk staff. So what is the amount we paid out for, what is the amount we paid out, we're planning on paying out for the front desk staff? What is the total front desk salary? What does that percentage work out to? So let's say it works out to 3.5%, and then you pay out each person 3.5% of their salary. Or you could say based on site. So we saw one in there that said, all of these folks at the site are going to be considered the same. The most advanced model, and this is kind of leaning towards, I think what you're getting at is, the most advanced model is, well, we're talking about team, and we're defining that as not only just providers, but also MAs, which are maybe easier, right? Because MAs tend to cover the same provider. But now we have front desk people who might cover multiple providers, or one provider on one day and one provider on another day. How do we distinguish? That's really hard to do, and you might just say, for this team, here's how much we pay per front desk staff. I think it's going to be really difficult if you say, well, let's let the front desk manager or the site manager or the providers decide, right? So the only thing I could add to your question is, if they're serving multiple teams and each of those teams earned a differential amount of incentive compensation, you kind of have to divide up that front desk staff person's FTE. You could probably do that with data from your EHR/practice management system, but that seems like a lot of work for maybe not a lot of money. So using an estimate might be fine.
Great, thanks. So our next question is, what have you seen folks do for behavioral health providers for incentives? Do they have the same type of RVU, or have you seen any other creative ways of doing it?
Well, yeah, so that's a great question, right? Because this is just like primary care and medical. You might, have, when we talk about, excuse me, the productivity piece, right? Different amounts even within medical, OB, peds, adult medicine, right? Versus just kind of family practice or general primary care might all have their own levels. Behavioral health obviously is never going to reach these levels. So For them, it's what is your desired level of productivity. So if you're asking for a number, that's something we're still struggling with. What I would say is, what is your goal? Think about what is your goal for them, or even you could do, kind of my concept of that reward system, which says 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Let's set it up to say the threshold for earning incentive compensation begins with, kind of the top third of our providers. We want them to earn it. So we would make that cutoff for earning incentive compensation, the provider who's at the bottom of the top third, or in a way, kind of the, I guess, 67th percentile of distribution.
Wonderful. Thank you for your input on that, which I know probably a lot of people are thinking about, so that was another great question.
Yeah, think about dental too. If I could just add, I'm sorry, one more thing.
Sure.
On dental, the RVUs are even more important because dental is more procedure based than medical. So I would be fine, and I've seen systems that rely on visits for medical and RVUs for dental.
Great, thank you for that clarification as well. Okay, last question that we have right now is, with all the talk about burnout and having to see so many patients, does adding a financial incentive make all that go away in your experience?
That's a great question. No, it's not a panacea to solve everything. To me, again, this is why I said I'm not going to bury the lead. There are some providers who want to and can do more, or are doing a lot and want to get rewarded for it, and know they would be rewarded for it in other places. So I guess just in my experience, the high performers tend not to be the ones who are most worried about burnout. They're more efficient, they know how to make it work, or they're just more driven and they accept it, or, in some cases they want to earn more money and they understand it's a trade-off. So so I can say the flip side, to your question, in my experience, it doesn't exacerbate burnout. Does it ameliorate burnout? Probably not. It just maybe makes those working hard feel a little better about working hard, especially if they're generating that productivity.
Great, thank you very much. I know a lot of those things are tied together. Burnout and compensation could go together. So thank you also for addressing that. Well, it looks like we're about at time. Wanted to let you guys know once again that this webinar was recorded, or is still being recorded rather, and it will be emailed to you as well as made available on our website. So if you'd like to share it with folks, feel free to do so, and we would love that. So feel free to do so. And if you're having trouble finding it, you can search on our website in the search bar, and also it will be delivered straight to your mailbox as well. So this was Curt's last webinar with us for this series, but we do have 2 left, and we're going to be talking about on the next 2, on June 5th and June 12th, ongoing how to stay in an ongoing conversation about compensation, and also how to involve your board and also get internal buy-in about compensation. So talking about a lot of great things. I really appreciate Curt and all of his great expertise on the boots on the ground. And again, thank you so much to Curt, and thank you all for joining us, and we will talk to you guys next week. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great day.